We're going to talk about David Montgomery for a moment. And I don't do a whole lot of, I love psychology. Like I really do. I've loved psychology for a long time. But when you're talking about someone's mental health, I think that it really changes the tune in a hurry. So I'm going to put the disclaimer out there that I'm not a doctor, not a psychologist. I have no training or anything in this space, but there's going to be some things that I'm going to say that I've been saying. And where I want to start with is some positivity, though. Number one, David Montgomery was talking yesterday on the Up and Adam show that there's potentially a new nickname for Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery. Before I say what that is, does anybody in the chat know what it is? Did you guys hear this yet? I thought it was perfect. And this is going to reference a video game from back in the 90s, I believe, is when it came out. And it was about Sonic the Hedgehog. And then he had a little buddy that came along a little bit later, I believe, in the cycle of the Sonic games. Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery are now Sonic and Knuckles. I thought that was just hilarious. So who's Sonic, who's Knuckles? Well, I'm going to go ahead and say that Montgomery's probably Knuckles. And Jahmyr Gibbs is Sonic, as electric as he is. I thought that was just fitting. What do you think about the new nickname? You like it?
Yeah, I don't mind. I'm an old, video game guy from back in the day myself. So, Sonic and Knuckles, I guess, kind of go with that, I guess. But yeah, I mean, listen, it's no, Megatron type nickname, but I'll give it to them. But yeah. Yeah.
All right. So he also talked about some other things or spoke to a few other things. Oh, Ed O'Neill just popped in with a $4.99 super chat. He says, can we get the co-host thoughts on the Lions beating Seattle and Goff's day? We just spoke about that. And he kind of ate crow. So Ed, if you just joined, we'll be talking about it in just a few moments here. It'll pop up for you. We just literally spoke about it. And I appreciate your super chat there, $4.99 donation to Rockhound Detroitlions, Rockhound Cancer Foundation. Let me get you.
You sure about that?
Oh, nope, wrong one.
You sure about that? You sure about
Oh, I don't know what's going on today. What's going on with my pads? They're all mislabeled. Here we go.
Jameson makes the catch. Touchdown, Detroitlions. That's what I'm talking about. That's what I'm talking about, number 9.
All right, so next up, he was also talking about just being a humble guy, right? Or at least Kay was. Wants to provide for the city of Detroit. And he was talking about personal accolades. So he was asked, what does it mean when you rush for 1,000 yards or, you get these touchdowns or you have these records? And he quite simply said, I really don't care about them. I mean, he didn't say that exactly, but that's kind of what he said, that he would rather produce for the city of Detroit, that you're not going to be remembered for your 1,000-yard seasons. You're not going to be remembered for scoring 20 touchdowns. You're going to be remembered when you bring a Super Bowl to the city. And he spoke about it even in my opinion, a little bit bigger than that was what it does for the city financially. He didn't come out and say financially, but you could kind of tell that's what he was talking about, that it's bringing more opportunity to the city by bringing a Super Bowl there. Yeah, it's overdue. And he was also talking about how beautiful the city is, how great the city is. There was another individual that happened to be on mainstream media yesterday that said that Detroit is a wasteland. I'm not going to go into all that stuff, but you guys can look it up for yourself. But I'm glad to hear that David Montgomery really doesn't care about the personal stuff. He would rather see the city thrive. That means a ton to me. Now, I'm not from Detroit. Spent a lot of time in Detroit, but I'm not from Detroit. And I can only imagine for the Detroiters how much more that means to them that these players are more in tune with providing for the city and giving the city opportunity than they are for just, taking a bountiful, bounty of riches from the city and moving on in their life. So that meant a whole heck of a lot to me that David Montgomery's in the right mindset there. He also mentioned that he doesn't want to play for another coach, that things happen for a reason, and he's in the right place at the right time. And Dan Campbell is the only coach that he wants to play for. So I would expect that as long as he is healthy and he's able to run, David Montgomery's probably going to be here a little bit longer than his initial contract. That's what I'm hoping for. Lastly, before I get into the topic that is going to be a little bit of a downer today, Walter Payton. So I came across this article. Now he's up for an opportunity this weekend. Now I know he doesn't care about the personal accolades, but it's bound to happen anyway. Back in 2019, David Montgomery was in an interview and he spoke about his vision and goals as a player. And even though that he may be a third-round pick, he certainly doesn't think of himself as a third-round pick. From the moment that he joined the Chicago Bears, it was apparent that the young running back from Iowa State was quietly self-confident. He doesn't chirp about it a whole lot. He kind of stuck to his own. And it's not really his way to be, out in the bright lights, if you will. However, when he was asked, he didn't really beat around the bush about what he wanted to do with his career. He thinks that he won't just be good in the NFL. This is back in 2019. He thought that he would be great, and he's ready to show the world. His first impressions certainly were eye-catching, if you will. It started with a monster run during his first padded practice at training camp. And then Montgomery took a handoff to the left, broke through a tackle at the line of scrimmage, and ran over another defender a few yards later, and then carried 3 more on his back until he finally fell after getting a first down. It was the best highlight of training camp in 2019 for the Chicago Bears. Probably one of the lone highlights, honestly. Just saying, broski. But Montgomery wasn't done. In his first preseason game, he topped himself in the second quarter. With the Bears trailing 6-0, the rookie caught 2 passes for 29 yards and ran for another 17, including a 7-yard touchdown to take the lead. He was the workhorse that entire drive. He was the workhorse for that team and always was, showcasing versatility, quickness, vision, and what was assumed to be underrated power, which we have now seen. Just last weekend, he put Devon Witherspoon on the ground and earned himself his second scepter of the season. But David Montgomery was aiming to be like somebody else. He wanted to emulate somebody else that was also a Chicago Bear. Montgomery has said on multiple occasions that Walter Payton was his favorite player growing up. And he isn't just saying that to placate the Bears fans. It was his honest truth. So one can imagine how excited this kid was when Chicago traded up to get him. Not to mention the pressure that comes with playing the position Payton made iconic. One would think that Montgomery is merely trying to do sweetness proud. Not exactly, though. His goal is even higher, according to NFL.com's Meet the Rookies segment. And this is what he had to say. It's amazing, man, just to be on the same team he was. His legacy still carries on. Initially, it was like I got some big shoes to fill. So it kind of like gives me a comparison that you can be like him one day. So make no mistake about it, he idolizes Payton. So what's in front of him this weekend? If David Montgomery scores a rushing touchdown on Sunday, he will pass Walter Payton's record for the longest streak of consecutive games with a rushing touchdown. This will be number 8 on Sunday against Dallas, and I believe that he will get it. With all that said, those few topics in there, Tony, what are your comments?
Yeah, David Montgomery was a guy when the Lions ended up signing him. I was a huge fan of David Montgomery's when he played for the Bears, and I really liked this signing. If you look at those Bears teams when he first came over, those Bears teams had, their offensive line was one of the worst in the league. He was relatively healthy, even though he was getting absolutely pounded every game. That was my only concern, was what's his durability going to be like because of the beating he took in those first few years in Chicago. This guy has come out, and there were a lot of Lions fans. There were a lot of Lions fans who were ticked that Jamal Williams didn't re-sign here, right? A lot of them wanted Williams, and a lot of them were upset about David Montgomery. And I was on record saying, I love this signing. Montgomery's younger, he's a little bit, more physical, I think, than Williams. Williams was a fan favorite here, and he had a tough job coming in and filling in for Jamal Williams. And not only has he done that, I think he's excelled at what people thought he was going to do, right? So, I'm really happy to see him do this. He's fit in perfectly with this team. He's fit in perfectly with the city. He's only getting better, which is crazy to me, right? He's actually improving the way that he runs the ball. And, Jamal has the record for most touchdowns in a season by the Lions or by a Lion. Montgomery's one of those guys who can absolutely compete and potentially break that record. And again, that's also a testament to the offensive line. But I'm a huge fan of David Montgomery. I love what he brings. I love what he offers. He's the true thunder to Jameer Gibbs lightning. And I'm a huge fan.
As am I. It doesn't hurt to have a really good offensive line in front of you. But I've seen nothing but tremendous growth out of David Montgomery, and I was one of those guys that. I was disappointed about Jamal Williams in not having him come back because, man, he was a huge part of that season. And it's not easy to score that many touchdowns. And he kept hearing it was just 1-yard touchdowns. It really wasn't. If you go back and look at his statistics, I think he was averaging about 8 yards per touchdown run. He had a couple, really long ones. I think one from 50. He had a couple, 30, 20. But I think he was averaging right around 8 yards a touchdown. So it wasn't just these 1 yard, punch it in. Yeah, he had plenty of those, but you know what? It's not easy to get those either. There was another thing that he said about Jameer Gibbs, and that was him being somewhat similar to Shady McCoy, and that he is like he was talking about McCoy being just this elite running back, and that the only player that he has seen come close to the style and I guess really the running style that Jahmyr Gibbs has is Jahmyr Gibbs. So I find that interesting that he sees that kind of opportunity for Jahmyr Gibbs' future. And man, that would be super exciting if it comes to life. And we've seen plenty of shady McCoy style of running out of Jahmyr already, but he's barely scratching the surface right now. Jahmyr's kind of had a slow get off to the season compared to what we expected him to have to start the season, but he's still doing just fine. Go ahead.
Sorry. Well, sorry to cut you off there, but no, you know what? I disagree with that. And the reason being is this, right? Jahmyr Gibbs is never going to be the back that carries the ball 25 times a game. He's never going to get, I even think 20 touches is a lot for him. The Lions have a clear plan in place, right? A clear plan with Montgomery and Gibbs. And it's one of those situations where I don't know what it is, but certain times in the game or throughout the game, they're going to use Montgomery in certain situations on certain drives, and they're going to use Gibbs on certain drives in certain situations. And I like that, right? I like that they have a long-term vision with Gibbs, and they're not looking in the short term by, getting him beat up early on. They're almost protecting him and saving him. I find Gibbs more explosive this year than he was last year. The difference is the Lions are being tempered in how many times they're letting him touch the football and for the amount of contact that he's going to take.
So which part did you disagree with? Him being like Shady McCoy?
Oh, no. You said a lot of Lions fans are kind of upset that he's not being used or not having the production that he had last season, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah, we know it's a 50-50 backfield. It's definitely, I mean, you can look at the numbers. It is almost dead nuts in the middle, 50-50.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's just what they're doing. I mean, you're spot on. They're trying to save these guys. It's a long season. And we saw it in the first game by saving, Montgomery was having early success in the Rams game, and then he gets kind of pulled out a little bit, and in comes Jahmyr Gibbs. But you look at the end of the game, that's why. He was fresh. He was ready to go and just pounded the ball to get us the win. So next up is a topic that I really don't want to have to talk about this again, but at the same time, I'm not afraid to talk about it. I personally have never really battled with any mental health issues. And when I read this yesterday, I got to say I was a little infuriated because I spoke about this earlier in the season. And the huge reason why I try to be as positive as I can on this channel, and even with my constructive criticisms, I hope that people understand that I do a lot of things from stats and facts and research, and having constructive criticisms or realistic, ideas, it's not a bad thing. It sounds negative to people that want to take it as negative, but really it's just meant to give you information. So I always try to put myself in the player's shoes. Whenever I do a show, whenever I talk about anybody, I try to frame things in a perspective like, okay, if I was listening to this about myself and someone's talking about me, how would I take it? And if I was getting bashed on all the time, how would I feel? And I will leave that to other channels to do. There's plenty of them out there that thrive on negativity. Because when you bash on people or rag them or dog them or whatever you want to call it, or make up lies about them and spread rumors, it just kind of shows nothing more than you are the weak person, right? You're the one that probably has the issue. I'm not a weak person, so why would I want to do that to other people? I guess is how I look at it. Again, I'll leave that to other people to do. I hate to see it. I really do. I don't think it's something that we need to do as a society, but that's just my personal opinion. So I want to get into this story that absolutely floored me last night because it kind of has everything to do with what I just said. At the very beginning of training camp, I made mention to a few things about Terrion Arnold. And I said something to the effect that he's going to have some troubles this season. He's going to have his welcome to the NFL moment. He's going to have some penalties. He's going to make mistakes. And that fans really can affect a player's confidence, whether you believe it or not. Players' families, their friends, people in the room, right? They see things. They read things, they watch things, and they send those things to these players. Believe it or not, they see the stuff. And if you're bashing someone on social media, you're bashing somebody on YouTube or whatever, medium it is, whatever it is, even an article, they're going to end up hearing it or seeing it at some point. And it can really negatively affect people. And it can have an effect, on a player that can get really ugly, really dark, really quickly. And that's what I want to speak about with David Montgomery. So, Tony, I'm going to get your thoughts on this too, because believe it or not, everybody, Tony is working with people that have dual diagnosis, mental health issues and addiction. So this topic is really right up his alley. And if you're comfortable enough to talk about it this morning, Tony, once I get through this article, I would love to get your comments if you're okay with that.
Absolutely.
All right. So this article came out 22 hours ago, and it's all over the place. And it talks about Lions' David Montgomery opens up about overcoming suicidal thoughts in his rookie year. This is a dark area to be in right now, and I hope the YouTube doesn't try to cancel me for talking about this stuff, because some of these words that I'm going to say are on the shit can list, if you will. But the running back says that the criticism from fantasy football managers put him in a dark place in his first NFL season. Detroit Lions running back David Montgomery has rushed for over 1,000 yards twice in his 6-year career and continues to be a key contributor on a team that has legitimate Super Bowl hopes this season. But during an appearance and on behalf of Scouting America, which, by the way, David Montgomery is an Eagle Scout. I thought that was pretty cool, too. But anyway, on this week's Sports Illustrated fantasy football podcast called Fantasy Dirt with Michael Fabiano and Lindsey Rhodes, he opened up about a dark time in his rookie year with the Chicago Bears when he admitted to having suicidal thoughts, partly stemming from how fantasy football managers treated him. Here's his quote. When I was a rookie, I had a real stressful time in the league. I was at a point where I would have suicidal thought, and it was just a depression. It was just a depression and a scary year for me. And unfortunately, the people in fantasy were kind of helping me be aided to feeling that way. And I was at a point where I was scared to live. Montgomery shared that on a phone call from his nephew during that time, probably saved his life. Quote by Montgomery was, I was in a situation to where I was this close to doing something that I knew I shouldn't have done. That would have changed the trajectory of my life or changed the trajectory of everybody else around me in my life. And my nephew called me right when I was in the midst of doing so. That's powerful. I mean, I'm trying to hold back the being choked up here, because he was right in the throes of doing something to himself. And had that phone not rang, what would we be talking about right now? So he said, and he didn't say anything about football. He didn't say anything about how fast I was. He just said, Uncle Dave, I miss you. How are you doing? And my nephew, and it meant so much to me, because my nephew, he has leukemia. And I was in a very dark place. And from that point on, hearing my nephew's voice, I made a vow to myself and a promise to myself that I would never, ever allow anybody else to have that much control over my mind, my body, to make me feel like I wasn't worth anything or valued in a light to where I had a purpose on this earth. He said that he was seeing a therapist ever since, and it has changed his life. Good for you, David. He says, yeah, it was scary, but I got a really good therapist. I've been working with a therapist for 5 years now, and being able to regulate and express my emotions and being able to allow myself to know that I am enough, and I've been through a lot of things. I've been through a lot of places where people don't even know who I am, but I get to create that perception for myself to how I view myself and how my son views me. And, I'm having the best time of my life, and I'm enjoying life for exactly what it is. There's some very, very profound words in here by David. And I have to say that this is the biggest reason why, again, I try to be as positive as I can be. Not everything is going to be peaches and cream, right? Roses and rainbows, whatever you want to call it. We're going to have real conversations on this channel. That's just who we are. That's who I am. And the guests that I have on, we have no idea what their takes are going to be. But at the end of the day, I always try to end the show on positivity. Always. And I always try to sprinkle in positivity. Because if I ever affected somebody for them to feel this way, I would feel terrible. Worse than terrible, I'm sure. So my takeaway from this is number one, David, man, congratulations on getting through that. But more importantly for me, it's as fans, as humans, as brothers and sisters, however you want to frame this, we got to do better. We have to do better. Because we can't affect people in this way. And I understand you're not going to be happy about your stupid fantasy team. It's a freaking game. And if you're betting money on it and you're losing money, that's your fault, not their fault. Because we can only control what we can control. They can only control what they can control. So don't blame other people for your failures, I guess is where I'm going with this. Because if you're betting on somebody to do something and they don't do it, that's your fault, not theirs. I don't ever want to hear another story like this again, and I'm sure we will. You have a great education in this area, and I'd like to know your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I mean, I could talk about this for hours, so I'll try and keep this, reasonable. First of all, I just appreciate a lot of the comments there. Mike, Tracy, appreciate what you guys are saying in there. Yeah, it's tough, right? I'm extremely passionate about this. So, full disclosure, I do work with a psychologist out of Toronto. This guy, he was the lead psychologist for the Pan Am Games when they were here. He's a sports psychologist. I have a lot of training. I went to Brock University, took the Ontario Brain Injury Association program there, and I'm licensed to train in like mindfulness and cognitive behavioral therapy. So I'm a huge proponent of this stuff, right? So to talk about this, it's tough, but it's important, right? And there's some things I'm going to say here. I'm going to give you guys a quick little, 60 to 90-second blurb about kind of what's important here and what are some things I want people to kind of think about when it comes to mental health and kind of our own mental health. So, agree, disagree with my takes, think whatever you want, but I really want you to listen to this. And this is something that David Montgomery is really talking about in this article, where he says he struggled with his emotions, right? And if you're out there right now, if you're dealing with mental health, if you're dealing with any sorts of issues, it's okay to not be okay, right? It's okay to not be okay. And what's important with us is, if you have that, and this is kind of where David Montgomery's coming from a little bit. If you have that negative thought or that negative emotion, and you're focused on that negative thought or negative emotion, and you continuously think about it, the problem doesn't get better, right? The problem gets worse. And the reason for that is we can't control how we feel, right? You can't control your emotions. You can only feel how you feel, right? And that's difficult for people. So, to hear David Montgomery kind of going through this, I think kind of what his therapist has kind of been talking to him about is you can't control your feelings. You just can't. It's important to sit back and just feel them. So if David Montgomery is sitting back and feeling depressed or feeling sad because he's getting chirped by all these, people online and fantasy football, what he needs to do is just kind of sit back and be like, you know what? It's okay that I'm feeling sad. It's okay that I'm feeling, angry about this, right? And giving yourself permission to not be okay. And the kinder we are to ourselves, the better it's going to be in our long run, right? And everyone else is going to notice a difference. Now, I have the privilege of working with some professional athletes, with some Olympic athletes, and we do a lot of this training stuff. And, to hear David Montgomery kind of be able to talk about it publicly, it's important because so many athletes and so many people are out there doing this. And what's important too for people is if you are going through a tough time, if you're having a struggle, don't be afraid to reach out. I know us guys, there's a lot of guys, right? We kind of have that persona of, got to be the tough guy and we have to kind of put on that brave face all the time. But it's important to realize that, hey, it's okay to not be okay. And, and don't be afraid to make that phone call, right? A little phone call to a friend at any time, if you're suspecting something's wrong or if there's an issue, that can make a world of difference for people. So don't be afraid to reach out in these times and kind of talk about this. So when it comes back to specifically fantasy football and David Montgomery, we all get mad, right? We all get upset at players. I've been guilty of it myself from time to time. And it's important for players like Montgomery to step out and talk about this because it also gives me perspective too, right? I teach this stuff. I love this stuff. I'm so passionate about this stuff. But from time to time, we often forget that, these are human beings too, right? We see them through TV and they're almost like superhero figures in a sense. And we forget that they're human beings. So I credit David Montgomery a ton for doing this. And I think it's really important that he's speaking out. And I think more players need to speak out about the stressors, especially not necessarily even on themselves, but like you said, Will, the effect that it has on their family.
Yeah, I know we could go on for hours and hours and hours, and I don't want to minimize the importance of this topic. It's quite possible that, I might just do an episode. So I'm starting another channel after the season, and it's all about cancer. It's cancer sucks, and it's going to be all about having people on that just tell their story, good or bad. Warriors that made it, and warriors that didn't make it. Whether you've been affected personally or someone close to you, but there's a lot of mental health that goes along with battling cancer, or any major medical issue. You especially with cancer. I know personally that you wake up every day and you always wonder if that's the day you're going to get it again. That is always embedded in my brain. It'll never go away. And to have two people in the household that got cancer within 9 months of each other, you better believe it's in both of our brains that are they going to get it again? So maybe that is a mental health thing that I'm going through, that I have to constantly live in fear. Cancer is real. And that channel is going to open up the conversation. And it's going to be hopefully a conversation starter where we can just talk and you can just tell your story. And you know what? There's going to be somebody on the other end at 3:00 in the morning that's listening to this. and they're going to say, man, I needed that. And so it's okay to talk about it. It's needed to talk about it. I know that this is a football show and I don't do a whole lot of this stuff. But this I had to talk about because far often we see so much negativity surrounding, this player's a bust or, and I'm guilty of using the same words, right? And now I might think differently. Now I might think differently about how I phrase things. You kind of get thrown down that, jargon because that's what's been used. I think someone just said that in the chat a minute ago. I think it was Casey, that there's a lot of negative connotation in some of the verbiage that is used within the construct of football. And you're right. And it's kind of just inherent to us to adopt it because it's what's been taught to us. So look, these are human beings, man. This is their job. This is their career. This is their passion. They work very hard. They're paid a boatload of money, but that doesn't mean that they're any less real of people. And they still have the same challenges everybody else does. Whether you believe it or not, they still bleed red. So, David, man, if you ever hear this or if someone ever shares it with you, I just want you to know from me that I appreciate the hell out of you, man. And I'm sorry you had to go through that and that you're going through it every day, but you have definitely taken the right steps to share this with people and show them that it's okay, like Tony says, to not be okay. And we all need to find a way to get help any which way we need to. So any more final thoughts on this before we move on?
Yeah, I'm going to give you one quick thing just because we talked about this mental health aspect. So what I do with people is provide strategy. So I'm going to provide you with one 60-second strategy, for people listening that, maybe this can help them down the road. So it's a very simple concept, and it's called dog mind versus lion mind, which kind of goes with what we're talking about here. So let's just say for some reason I have a bone and there's a dog standing in front of us, and I have this bone and I'm waving this bone back and forth, and the dog's looking at the bone, and I take this bone and I throw the bone into the corner. What do you think the dog's going to do? The dog's going to chase the bone, right? It's almost like he's predetermined that he has to chase the bone. Well, let's just say for some weird reason there's a lion sitting here in front of us. Okay, same thing. I have that same bone and I'm waving that bone back and forth, and the lion's looking at us, and I take that bone and I throw the bone into the corner. What do you think the lion's going to do? Lions are going to look at the bone and be like, I don't want that bone because I got a big bag of bones right in front of me, right? And the lion's going to come after me. So think of the bone as being a distraction in our lives. How many times in our lives do we use our dog mind and chase every little distraction rather than using our lion mind and seeing through the distraction, right? And just quickly, I'll give you a quick real life example of how this works for me. I love sports betting, and up here in Canada, it's a huge deal, right? So, every commercial that comes on TV is, hey, download Bet365, get a free $500. So immediately my initial reaction is grab my phone, want to download it, right? And then I have to say to myself, Tony, stop using your dog mind, right? Because I know that's going to be trouble for me, and use my lion mind and kind of see through that distraction, right? Now, listen, that's a 60-second rundown of what is an hour-long lecture or talk, but you can kind of see that concept. So if anyone's out there kind of struggling with things, kind of wants to deal with things, doesn't really know what's going on, kind of think about the dog mind and lion mind and see if you can use that throughout, your day today. All right, we're good.
That's awesome, man. Yeah, that's awesome. I'm glad you used the frame of a lion because we're all lions here. Well, most of us.
Right.
And we're going to see through the distraction, which is the Dallas Cowboys this weekend. We're going to see right through them. So anyway, I appreciate you guys for listening, and those of you that stuck around to listen to that. It was needed. I feel